Hey, what's up, everybody? Welcome back to the Live Ultralight podcast. Today is going to be a pretty interesting episode. It's actually going to be mainly about a mountain race that I just did, my first one ever. And breaking that down, there was, I guess you could say, a lot of highs and a lot of lows. They came early, they came fast, they came late. It was an interesting one. I'm still trying to process everything that happened. And we're like half a week post-race at this point. So should be an interesting one. I've brought Tyler on here to help navigate through this. Stop me if I'm going too fast and question things that I did and shouldn't have done, things like that. So it'll be really interesting. But if you guys are just tuning into this podcast, this is the Live Ultralight podcast. It's all about getting you outdoors more comfortably and more confidently. Really trying to share experiences and just give you guys more touch points to be more confident when you head out into the backcountry. Now, this particular race isn't specifically backpacking or travel, adventure traveling, things like that. But there is a lot of takeaways in terms of human performance in ways that, things that you could learn and apply into a backpacking trip, especially one at high elevation. So with that, I guess we'll dive in. For those of you who've been listening for a while, you're probably well aware that I was planning on doing this race. It was supposed to be a 70K. It ended up being, I think, more like 75K, about 45 and a half miles. And the biggest part about this race, though, is really not the distance. It's the altitude that you start at and stay at, and also the amount of climbing and descending that you do. There was about 12,100 feet of climbing and descending, according to my watch. Other people got over 13,000 feet of climbing and descending. But either way, it was a lot. It was a lot. So should be interesting, I guess, as we get into this. But did I miss anything in just introducing the podcast or anything you want to chime in here with, Tyler?
No, I think the reason that this is valuable for backpacking or even adventure travel is just, like Tayson said, learning more about yourself allows you to apply that to your time on the trail, and trail running has been our preferred way to train for backpacking, and our best way to learn what we can do in the backcountry. So hopefully you guys have some takeaways from this, and that it's worthwhile for everyone.
Yeah, for sure. I think there will be really good takeaways, and I also want to caveat this with this idea that I am not good at this. I am very new to this, and I also feel like genetically, this is probably not what my body was built for or likes to do. But nonetheless, I enjoy it, and I think I enjoy the challenge of maybe feeling like it's extra hard for me. But yeah, the things that I'm saying, take with a grain of salt. I had a lot of lessons to learn, still have a ton of lessons to learn, but I'm no expert in this field. I've been running for about a year and a half now. And when I say running for a year and a half, I mean like before that there was no running, like in my whole life really. There were tiny spurts where I ran a little bit, but really had no idea what I was doing. And a lot of those were actually sports related, where I had a coach just, trying to condition you. So really was like an anti-runner, I would say. Started running about a year and a half ago. And when I started 2022, I felt like I wanted to try some kind of an ultra. I was looking for something like a 50K, came across this race, actually knew of this race beforehand, and just kind of decided they didn't have a 50K, they had a marathon, and they had a 70K. And I felt like the marathon wouldn't push me to train as hard as I wanted to be training, because we'll do marathons sometimes just backpacking, or we've done them fast packing, and so it kind of felt like I wanted to push the limit farther. So I ended up signing up for the 70K, which ended up being a pretty aggressive
pushing the limits
for me. Yeah. Yeah. So I guess let me just walk through the day itself, and just kind of break down the entire race and just try to call out specific things that I feel like are worth calling out. So my particular race started at 6 a.m. That meant that I woke up at 4:30 a.m., ate some food, and drank a little bit, and then navigated over to the start line so that I was there about 30 minutes early. So kind of stood around there. My wife took me over, and then we were meeting up with Joe, our videographer, and he was capturing this as well. at least at the intervals where there were aid stations, he was running the camera a little bit and getting some breakdowns, and also just talking to members of my family a little bit and filming that. So if you have interest in that, make sure you subscribe to our YouTube channel, Outdoor Vitals YouTube channel, because we will publish that here in another probably close to 2 months. We've apparently backlogged Joe. Apparently we're creating more content than he can edit right now. So we haven't even posted the video from the Grand Canyon or our Appalachian Trail. So it's a good chance it'll gonna be a little ways down there. But you want to get subscribed to that. Anyways, felt quite nervous, but felt pretty confident. I was running with a handful of our pieces, prototypes, and production. I had an altitude. I had our Tushars rain jacket in my pack, as well as my legendary rain skirt and rain mitts, just to have. I had a few first aid items, but mainly I was running with, I think I started that race with 2.5 or 3 liters of water. I think I had 3 liters of water. And the reason for that is these aid stations were about 8 miles between aid stations. And based off of my times and some of the training I had been doing, it shows that I'm losing about 2 liters of water every hour when I'm running, thinking that this wouldn't be quite that intensity, and based off some of the other sweat training stuff I've done, I was counting on me needing 3 liters of water between aid stations, about 1.5 liters of water per hour. So started the race off with that. Definitely had our Outdoor Vitals fast pack on, had an altitude on, had some prototype shorts on. But yeah, mainly I think I just started with a little bit heavier pack than most. As I looked around, most people had little vests and what seemed like just 2 flasks. Never did see anyone with a full bladder except for me. And I had 2 liters of water in a bladder and then 2 flasks, which those are 0.5 liter each. So that's where I get up to that 3 liters. But
those are like this ultralight hydro flasks that runners use in their running vests, if you're not familiar with that.
Yep.
I will pause it also to set the stage a little more. The race started at just over 10,000 feet, right, in elevation. And Tayson had made the smart choice of going up there more than a full day early, right?
I slept, I've got a camp trailer. I pulled it up there, slept Thursday night, was up there all of Friday. Slept Friday night and then started the race.
And I came up Friday night to talk to the trail runners to the ultra racers at the packet pickup. We were doing some R&D stuff and trying to collect some information from all those awesome athletes, and it was looking pretty ominous. It poured rain like crazy Friday afternoon, and the forecast was heavy rain for Saturday. So
yeah, Tyler did a good job selling rain jackets, actually. He also, if you didn't know, when you're on the Tushars Mountain Run and you have a Tushars rain jacket in your pack or on your body, you're 10% faster. So
yep, that's what I told everyone at least.
It's a pretty good sales pitch, but yeah, so definitely was expecting some ominous weather in the afternoon. Kind of made you want to push in the morning and get a good ways through some of the race before any kind of storms hit, because there was a section that gets really bad in the rain, really sloppy. It's very clay filled and is rough. So
before you get into like actually what you did when you started the race, why don't you give them an overview of like the terrain, just the way the course wraps around, where the downhills and uphills are, and like the things that you were worried about.
Yeah, so this race, elevation wise, is just absolutely brutal. I mean, it's like they tried to put almost all of the race where you're going straight uphill or straight downhill. Not really, but it's like that. In fact, one that has been compared to it that you may know if you're a trail runner is the Hard Rock 100. Now, this is not the Hard Rock 100 by any means. That's definitely harder, but it's nearly as like steep, raise and descent as the Hard Rock 100. It also starts at super high elevation. It's just a shorter race, and it's in Utah. So basically, you are just running around from 10,000 up to 12,200 feet back down. That's the high point of the race on Mount Delano. That's the third highest peak or mountain range in Utah. But then you're just like dropping back down off of that, and then you
Drops
climb back
all the way
up.
down to 7,500. Then you have to climb your way all the way back up to finish.
It works its way towards, at mile 30, you hit the low point in the race, which is really the pinnacle of the race. So you actually are up about 10,000 feet. Then you drop from one aid station to the next is almost all entirely downhill for like 6 to 7 miles. You hit this low point called Miners Park, and at Miners Park, basically you take a break and then you turn around and climb about 3,500 feet straight back up the mountain to 11,000 feet. So it gets down to 8,000 feet, maybe 9, right in that area. But then you turn around, and at 30 miles in, now the next like 7.5 miles is nothing but climbing straight back up. When I say that, I mean it's just switchbacks. It's like switchbacks for 2 hours or 3 hours, however fast you are, I guess. But you're already 30 miles into a day. So that's really the pinnacle of the race for most people, where if they can get through that, they're likely going to finish. So that was in my mind, in the back of my mind, trying to be like, okay, hold back. You need energy for that. You need, to get to that point in a good position. And so going into the race, that was a big thought of mine. That's usually also where people running the 70 and the 100K races are picking up pacers that can start helping them, and start pushing them to the end of the race. So
I was really hoping to help pace you from there, not because you were being competitive enough to need it or because I knew what I was doing, but because I wanted to just experience it with you and be in that hardest part. You hit that very lowest point at 28 miles, and then you still have to get to the 43-mile mark.
Yeah.
So
when I hit it, I was at 29.5 based off of actual run. So, But I do want to cover that because I think it really would have been helpful because as things happen, it definitely happened in this race. So anyways, back to starting this race off. A lot of excitement. 6 a.m. hits. I start off with 120 people. And you're just trying to figure out what you're doing. I feel like some people knew what they were doing. Some people like me were just like trying to figure out a pace. Should I be passing people? Should I be just walking out of the gate? You're just trying to figure that out, and kind of settled into a groove. I was trying to film some of it, so I remember pulling out the camera a couple times and trying to get some shots, and probably didn't slow me down much, but moved through this section. It was really pretty. The sun was coming up. You're cresting and going through areas at 11,000 feet above tree line, and it was really nice. And started to talk to a few people. There's a few people that I knew actually ended up knowing in the race. I didn't know they were doing the race till I was there, but was aware of them. Actually, some kind of distant family members. So that was nice to see them at the start, and I figured I'd be seeing them. And I just started clicking off the miles. And between kind of filming and being caught up in the race, I think I wish that I had been a little bit more focused on some of my hydration. And then I kind of started to realize that about 4 miles in, I'm like, okay, let me make sure I'm eating and drinking. And I started to focus on that. But about that same time, one of these family members caught up to me and started talking to me. And I got caught up a little bit in just conversing with them. And so I probably, didn't drink and eat as much as I wanted to there because I was really trying to hit my markers for that. And all of a sudden we get to the 8.5 mile mark, which is our first aid station. Now this aid station is in the middle of nowhere. There's no one like from crews that are there, just race people, race volunteers that are there. And so I get there, I'm feeling pretty dang good. I mean, the first little bit we clicked off pretty well. I was running with a group, and just felt like I was running a pretty smart race. But my first thought was I pulled out my water bladder, and my heart kind of sunk because I realized, oh great, like I drank one of my, or maybe both of my front flasks, not quite both, and then I pulled out my water bladder and I'd drinking less than half of it. And I was like, oh man, I thought I had drinking more than that. And so I kind of thought, dang, I kind of messed that up. I should have at least drank 2 liters, if not closer to all of the water that I brought. But again, I think I just kind of getting caught up with it. I'm like, I'm the only one out here with this much water. No one else is doing their thing. And I think that maybe played a little bit into it. So I filled up my water and got going out of there. And
So that was 4 miles?
No, that's 8 miles in.
That was 8 miles in, and you had drank essentially half of the water that you had planned for that one.
Yeah, I probably had drinking a liter and a half. I know I drink in at least a liter and a half, but not more than that. So,
and then you also said that when you did those last sweat tests for sodium, you were in the like 2,000 milligrams of salt that you were needing per hour.
Per liter.
Per liter. So that's 4,000 per hour.
Per hour.
So you didn't get the salt either.
Yeah, so I wasn't getting all the salt in that I wanted to, wasn't getting all the hydration in. I ate one snack, maybe. I wish I could remember if it was one or two. No, I think I had one snack, but I also drank this thing from Scratch Labs called Super Fuel, which has 400 calories in a drink mix. You mix it up, it's almost becomes like a syrup. It's pretty thick. And I had drinking that. That went in pretty good, and so I was feeling okay about that. But yeah, I got my stuff filled up and started to go on. And the next little bit was just a straight climb up and through this pass. Not a massive climb, maybe 500-foot climb or something like that, but I definitely started to feel not good right there. I started to cramp, by mile 9. By the time I'd even crested that, I was feeling like I was starting to cramp or just feel a little bit off. So I take that back. I hadn't started to cramp yet, but I was feeling off. And got up through the pass, and it started to drop off the other side. It was pretty steep, and I was like, oh man, now, I ran the first 8 miles really good. Everything felt really good. And as soon as I started to drop off the other side, my lower legs, so my calves and the front of my calves, like my shin area where there's those muscles there, and my knees were feeling hurt and stiff. And I was thinking, this is really early to already be feeling that. And
that was before you did the climb up to the very top of Delano?
I'm still
downhill?
descending off the top before we turn and go up the high point of the race. And so I'm like at mile 9. I get down in there, and about mile 10, we start turning to go up the steepest climb. So it's a good 2,000-plus foot climb, going from 10,000 feet up to 12,200-ish, I believe, is what Delano is. So and right there, so now I'm at mile 10, I start to cramp up, and I'm thinking, this is really bad. You know what I mean? I felt pretty crappy from like mile 9 up to mile 10, and now I'm starting to cramp. I got to get all the way up this 2,000-foot pass. Like, what is happening? This is just bizarre to me. And so, so I basically started pushing, and
do you remember how fast you were going up to that point? Like,
up to that point, I was hitting my pace markers. So I hit the first aid station at 2 hours. So
8 miles in 2 hours.
Yep.
So that's a pretty easy pace for a trail runner. So that's good.
So I didn't feel like I was pushing too fast. I was trying to hold back, but not like, I was kind of trying not to get caught up behind groups, but I wasn't really passing anyone. I was just trying to settle in and run a smart race, I felt like.
Okay.
I didn't use my trekking poles the first 8 miles. Just kind of kept my hands free. I didn't see massive climbs. And my thought also with that was, I'm going to need my arms later in the day. So I didn't use trekking poles. Maybe that ended up being a factor. I don't know. But yeah, staying pretty consistent. But yeah, turned to go up this climb, and I just started to struggle. And trying to put myself, I guess, back into that position. I'm cramping, and I wish you could just like take notes, and hopefully I kind of got a video clip or something of like what was happening. But thinking back, I don't know if I was like already feeling some calorie loss, or if my knees were hurting, or if my gut was already hurting. I know my gut was turning pretty early on, so it might have been a little bit of that too, but just wasn't feeling fantastic. But pushed and got up the climb, and by the time that you get to the top, you're like, oh yes, I can't wait for the downhill, right? And this is actually my first time summiting Delano, which was kind of cool. But where you hit up there, now you hit into where all the marathoners that started after you and all the half marathoners that took a much shorter route are also at the peak. So it's super busy up there. I get up to the top, and I'm just thinking, this is not good. Now I'm about 12 to 13 miles, probably 12.
Right at 12,
yeah,
is what the map says.
And I'm just thinking, this is not good right now. Like, and I'm just like, in my head, I'm getting down, and I'm getting really frustrated. And something someone who works with us in PR said to me before the race was, hey, you're going to have super low points, you're going to have super high points. They can come at any point in time, but they will fade. And so I'm just trying to convince myself, like, this is just a low point. I'm just getting my low point out of the race early, and it's going to fade. But just having tremendous pain in my lower legs. As soon as I started to go down that hill, it became super apparent that I was not able to run that terrain, especially as steep as it was. And so I'm just hiking down as quick as I can, but I'm in so much pain that it's probably a 1.5 mile distance to go from Delano, the peak of Delano, down to the road. I sat down 4 times at least. People were passing me and they're thinking that I like fell down or something. They're like, because why else would you be sitting on the side of this mountain right now?
His face isn't all muddy, but
yeah, like, and so they're out. I'm like, no, I'm fine. And I'm just trying to like stretch. I'm laying down and I'm actually
what did you
rolling.
say was in pain?
So I had some cramps up in my upper legs, and I was rolling those with my trekking pole, and the front part of my calf, when I'm going downhill, it's kind of interesting, but like if you were to flex your toe up, kind of the outside front of your calf is what gets like flexed, I guess.
That muscle that kind of sets into your shin.
Mm-hmm. Goes right along your tibialis or whatever, on the front of your lower leg there. That was in a lot of pain. It was kind of cramping, but just that was kind of an area that had hurt me since the Grand Canyon, and I'd struggled with. And going into this, I'll just say, like, I had to derail almost all of my training plans through June and starting into July because of the injuries that I was working through from the Grand Canyon. But my last like 2 runs, I had felt really good, and so I'm just thinking, okay, hopefully I've worked through those and I'm going to be ready for this race. But anyways, so yeah, coming down, just a lot of pain in that lower leg. I'm cramping still. I'm struggling, and I'm also, because of all this pain, I think not drinking as much as I want. But I was also nervous that I was nervous to drink too much because I didn't have I didn't feel like I had enough salt in my drinks, even though I had quite a lot. I was mixing basically a hyper, which is 1,750 milligrams of salt per liter of water. So a little bit under like 2,000 milligrams per liter. And I just kind of felt like I didn't have enough salt for some reason, is what I was feeling like. And so I, again, probably under-drank as I went through that scenario. In fact, I put some notes down. Let me pull those out on my phone. But
and as a disclaimer, Tayson's on the extreme side of the sweat test.
Massive.
And so what did they call it? You were like a level 5, which is
severe according to their categories.
Severe salty sweater. So if you're interested in figuring out how much salt you need per liter, there's 3 or 4 companies out there that allow you to do a sweat test that you can mail into them after you do the test, and then they'll give you a report back. So that's what Tayson had done, and what was making him feel like he needed to have even more than those Scratch Lab 1,700 milligrams.
Yeah. So basically, as I got down and off there, and I started. You hike the road for about a mile or so up to the next aid station at what's called Mud Lake, and I actually passed some family members at this same area that I didn't even know were going to be up there. They're actually up there watching this other distant family as well as cheering me on, and that was really. It was actually kind of emotional for me, which is, it seems funny, right? You're like 16 miles into the race or something at this point, but I was at such a low point and I was so discouraged and disappointed that I was already having all of these issues that I was at a real like emotional low point, I think. And so when I saw these family members, I felt pretty emotionally charged up, like almost teary-eyed, just kind of just I don't know, it was weird, but just got a big emotional charge out of it, and then went the other half mile up to the actual aid station, and that's where I had like my biggest crew of the day. I had my parents there, but also Bree and Joe were there, and they brought my kids, and my sister was there, and so got to spend a second there. And that was, for whatever reason, I didn't expect this in a race pit stop, I guess, but got a lot of energy, I think, from that. That just wasn't really expected. So by the time that I had gotten there, I had now drank between that aid station and the next one, so that 8-mile section, I drink in 2.5 liters of water. So I did drink quite a bit. I had finished my super fuel. I guess I had only started it in that first section, the first 8 miles, but in the next 8, I had actually finished it. I had eaten a pack of gummies and 1 honey stinger. So I wasn't actually too far off, but my biggest issue with this one is it took me 3.5 hours from aid station to aid station because of me slowing down, but also just that massive climb and descend. And so it was, even though that was not too shabby of eating and drinking, for 3.5 hours, it was also, again, below the thresholds that I really needed. So I got there and I said to Bree, I said, okay, I need my clothing bag because in there I had compression sleeves for my lower legs. I'd never used them once in my life. I had heard about them. I'd asked some people about them. And I just felt like my legs have been puffy and almost swollen since the Grand Canyon. So I wanted to give them a shot in this next session. So I put on these compression leg sleeves. And almost instantly, just that pressure kind of felt like it gave me some relief. Along with that, I had Bree mix up my water bladder, and I had her mix 3 hypers in the 2 liters of water. So I went up another section on my salt because I knew that I needed to get on top of hydration and salt and get these cramps, subsided, or my race was, who knew if I was even going to be able to finish, if I was going to have that many cramps that early on in the race. Keep in mind, I'm at 16 miles at this point, 16 and a half miles. And so she did that. And sat, kind of stretched for a minute, and I don't know, those pit stops, they probably feel like you're sitting there a minute, but but for the runners, it feels like you just can't sit there very long. You need to keep moving, and maybe that's some of my inexperience. I also had one of our 1/8-inch foam pads, and so every aid station I'd go in and I'd lay down and try to stretch, whereas all the other runners would just kind of stand around the tables in the aid station and grab their food and water.
Being on their feet nonstop.
Yeah. Which, I don't know which is right and wrong at this point. I thought I was doing a really smart thing, but maybe a mix would be better. I don't know. But left that aid station, like I say, having a little bit of energy again and just thinking, okay, I need to rewrite my expectations for this race right now. I need to just focus on finishing and just focus on, maybe some good will come of that. And so I kind of walked out of that aid station for about a mile with another runner that had talked to us at the booth. And he was a 100K'er, and he was also having a real low point right there. And we kind of walked together for about a mile, and he said, I think I'm feeling a little bit better. I'm gonna start running again. He ran ahead, and so then I also started to push. And I was able to start to run some of those downhill sections in this next part. I think the next part we probably dropped about 1,500 feet down to a lake called Blue Lake. And it was basically, as I got farther and farther along that, I started to feel a little better and better. My calves were feeling way better with those compression sleeves on. My hydration, I was really putting that down pretty well and just started to feel better. Got a little bit of food down and some of the super fuel. And then, just started to be able to pick up the pace there and do well. Got to the bottom of that where you basically turn and then do this big long climb up to the next aid station. So I think the section right there was like the shortest section of the day at only 6 miles between the aid stations.
It's a full 2,000 feet from Blue Lake to the aid station.
That's interesting. Yeah. So I started up that next climb and I was feeling good. Like I was like, holy cow, I've rebounded, doing good. I've settled into this like pace, and I started catching and passing people on this uphill, and I wasn't running, right? I'm just power hiking really at a really smooth and fast rate. Catch up to this one runner that was doing the 100. No, she was doing the 70K as well, but she had run a bunch. Was from Seattle. Her name was Mary, and me and Mary just trucked up the hill and passed another person or two and got out of there. And I remember seeing my family members that had seen me before the Mud Lake section and just saw how bad. They were asking because they had binoculars. They're watching me up on the hill and they're saying, like, "Are you okay? Like you kept stopping. Like what was happening? What's wrong?" And they could probably see just where I was at. So coming up and out of that climb, I felt like I'd put together a really good section, and they're like, "Holy cow, you're flying! You caught up to the other family members that they were watching and passed a handful of people. And you're like, man, you must be feeling a whole lot better." And I'm like, "Yeah." And I had actually told Bree at the last section, I said, "Take everything that I told you and just push it all backwards because I'm going way slower than expected from here on out. And so then I got concerned that they weren't even going to be at the aid station. Fortunately, they had just arrived and went to that aid station. And because I think of how well that section had gone, I told Debris again, I said, all right, do another 3 packets of hyper in the 2-liter water bladder, get me a super fuel, and that's what I need. The super fuels were going down the easiest. Instead of eating them, I could just drink them, and it just seemed like that was working the best for me as far as just getting calories into my body.
So that first time that you did the 3 hypers, that put you 1,100 milligrams of salt over what your recommendation was, but you felt like you were behind. So going into it this time, you were just kind of thinking like,
that works, so let's keep it going.
Okay.
Yeah. Which is ended up being a mistake, which we'll talk about here. Because the problem with it, too, is if you're going to do one of these sodium sweat tests, do it early enough that you can test it as well. So I was going into this based off some scientific data, but not testing it, and not especially on big endeavors. I was essentially doubling or tripling the amount of salt I'd probably taken on any previous run or long hike without really testing it too much, just kind of basing it off of the science of it. So, that was definitely a point. But so to that point, though, now I'd between those 2 aid stations, I'd eaten a waffle, a Honey Stinger waffle bar thing or whatever they're called. I had a super fuel, and I had a couple pieces of banana at the aid station. I had drank 2.2 liters of water, it says as well. So I had done better with, I don't know if I'd say better, but the salt seemed to really be helping. I was never getting to the 2.5 to 3 liter level. I was always getting the aid station with a little bit extra. But anyways, left that aid station feeling like, man, the race has kind of turned around for me. I'm feeling better. I'd made up a lot of time and started down this next section. Now, this next section I was very scared for because it's all downhill, like 100% downhill. You drop from, I want to say 10,000 plus feet down to 8,000 feet. So it might have been 11,000 feet or close to that.
Yeah, from about 10,700.
Yeah, down to about 7,900 feet.
Yes.
So started down that and was feeling okay, but I kept trying to run, and I would make it like 10 steps, and then the pain would be so great in my lower legs that I just have to stop. And then I'd like power hike as fast as I could, at like a 20 minute per mile or 18 minute per mile pace. And then I'd be like, okay, I'm gonna try to run this little section, and I'd try to run. I'd get about 10 steps into it, and I'd just crash again. I'd be like, this is just so painful. So by the end, I just settled into just hiking as fast as I could down this trail. And
what was the terrain like going down it? If I remember right, it's pretty rocky, right?
It varied. There's sections of it that are really good, and then there's sections of it that are get really nasty. Rock slides, cutting down the side of the hill, a few bigger step downs and stuff like that. Those are kind of in the middle lower section, I would say. But the upper section started off pretty dang good, and then it just kind of got worse. And then eventually, the last mile or so, you actually tee into a dirt road and cruise the mile down, around a bend, and back up to the aid station.
Was it muddy? Had you been
rained on? So I had somehow miraculously avoided the rain. I don't know how.
I was watching the radar all day, and it just looked socked in. Like the radar was kind of like moving around Delano.
Yeah.
But
when I left Mud Lake, the second aid station, it was starting to thunder, and I thought, all right, I need to get up through this pass and start dropping off the other side as quick as I can. That was part of what pushed me out of that aid station. So I knew it was just about to start raining there. But when I dropped into Mud Lake, no rain came, and then as I was climbing out of Blue Lake, got sprinkled on. That was it. And right before I got to that station, it had just been dumping on that station too. So I literally was just skirting the outside of the storm as it was going open over Delano and the higher section there of the race. But
so in that steep downhill, was the trail pretty wet, or was it like dry?
Damp, but not puddly. I guess it's like there wasn't any puddles, but it was moist. I felt like.
The reason I ask is because it seems like if the trail's real wet, it's more fatiguing to go down because you're sliding
Slipping
around.
and sliding.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I didn't slide much at all, like the whole day. Even climbing out of Blue Lake, where it was sprinkling on us a little bit, just wasn't really a big factor. So I got really lucky with that because it could get real nasty for sure. And
no lightning
no lightning scares for me. I think other people, running some of those shorter distances or that were behind me up on Delano and stuff, I think that could have got scary. But like I say, I just skirted around it. Bree and Joe, they were driving to the aid stations, got absolutely dumped on a few times. People at the start line, we had some people at a booth at the start line, got absolutely hammered, but thankfully I kind of ran around the outside of where the storm came up and over the mountain.
I've never done a day. My dad grew up in that area, and I spent a lot of time as a kid up in those mountains, and I don't think there's ever been a single day in July that I haven't gotten hammered, like with rain and lightning up there. So for you to make it through is pretty dang lucky, I think.
Yeah, it really was. But yeah, got to the bottom of that section, and it's all downhill, and so it's like deceptive of like how much it's taking out of you. Between that section on that downhill section, I barely finished a super fuel by the time I hit the bottom, and I couldn't remember eating anything else. My stomach was really bothering me. The interesting thing too about this section of trail is every time I would pass like a stream, I would have this really strong urge to drink the water. Because it was like, at least the ones that weren't muddy, like there's some that were muddy, there were some that were like pretty fresh springs, they were really crystal clear. I had this really strong urge to just drink the plain water. And I started to piece that together in my head thinking, all right, I've been drinking too much salt. My body just wants pure water. I'm over salted at this point. But unfortunately, I didn't really have a good solution to that. I still had this.
You had all the electrolytes in every single
I had
drink.
super fuel, and I had my Camelback that was mixed with really salty solution. And so I was kind of like, well, just kind of drink what I can feel like I can drink and get down, and then at the next aid station we'll switch it up. And but at the same time, because my gut had started to turn so heavily now, I didn't eat anything during that section, but I did drink one super fuel. So I got to the bottom, and I also had started to notice right towards the end of that my face had started to feel tingly, and my hands were feeling tingly and stuff, and kind of weird, almost like it was like a small pulsing like twitch in my face. I got down to the aid station, I took a seat, and I asked for just plain water, started to drink that, and my stomach just felt terrible at this point. Like the guy at the aid station, which is pretty cool. He's actually someone who knew of us. He walked over. He's like, "Aren't you the guy I've seen on YouTube?" And he's like, "Yeah, I've got some of your stuff." And it was a cool conversation. I'm like dying, so I'm like, "Yeah," But he's like, "Dude, we got to get you some food. You got to eat, And he went and made this little bowl of food for me. And he's like, "You got to try to eat it." And I ate a few bites. Like I ate as much as I felt like I could. He brought me a bowl of like pasta with like some little bit of meat and red sauce in it.
Oh yeah, that was like one of the actual like lunch aid stations.
Yeah, some of these aid stations, they do like these little actual foods like quesadillas or
turkey sandwiches or
wraps, yeah, something like that. I don't know. That's the only actual food that I ate or tried to eat. Ate a tiny bit of it and was just like, man, I am struggling. And he came over. He's like, "Dude, you can't lay here too long. You're gonna start cramping up if you don't get moving again." And because I was probably at that aid station to that point the longest for sure, but maybe 15 minutes, maybe 10 minutes, something like that. I don't know. It doesn't feel long, but it feels long at the same time, type of thing. But so tried to eat, couldn't really eat. Had a little bit of Coke there, but also just had like a full flask of plain water. Then I had refill up another flask of plain water. Mixed a super fuel, and then in my water bladder, I went with just 2 hypers again instead of 3, which I regret because at this point, and this is where long days are getting fatiguing. So I'm sitting at 29 and a half miles, right, at this point in the day. I know I still got a lot more to go.
And a massive climb.
I've got a massive climb ahead of me that's just looming. But I'd made up a lot of really good time, and so I was also feeling a little bit of like pressure to be like, hey, you're doing pretty good. Just keep pushing, you know, and you can finish this, and you can dig deep and finish this, and so. But if I had been in a more clear head, and one of the biggest lessons is, at that point in time, I should have realized just how far gone I had taken my salts too much, and I should have mixed my water bladder with at most 1 hyper for the 2 liters, or maybe even just gone with plain water, but taken salt in case I feel like I needed it on the trail. That would have been the best option, because I did have some like salt capsules. I had our Mountain Ops electrolytes, and so I could have just popped one of those if I felt like I got to a point where I needed salt. But instead, I was like, oh yeah, let's drop it back to 2 hypers instead of 3. I took 1, clean water, and then a super fuel, which a super fuel also has salt in it. I want to say 400 milligrams, which isn't a lot for me, but it's still a significant amount for like a regular drink, right?
Especially if that's on top of what you're mixing into your drinks.
Yeah, well, that's yeah. But like percentage wise, if I really did need 2,000 milligrams per liter, that's well under that threshold. But yeah, so took off. Was hoping I'd feel good, but I remember sitting at that aid station and turning to Bree and Joe and saying, "Can you see my face twitching?" I was like, "I can feel my face twitching," and they're looking and they're like, "No, we can't see it." And I'm like, I feel like I can see it. Like if I look kind of down, sometimes you can see your cheekbones or something. I felt like I could see it, but they couldn't see it. And I'm like, this is really strange. This is really weird, and probably not a good sign.
So you said it was your face and your hands?
My hands felt numb. They kind of felt like they started like tingly, but then at this point they felt numb, like if they were cold. But I knew they weren't cold. They just felt numb.
I felt that way when I've passed out. Did you feel lightheaded or anything?
I felt lightheaded at some point later in the race. I don't remember if it was quite that early or not, but like when just like from standing up you get kind of that head rush and stuff. But I don't think it was quite then. But yeah, just so like these tingly hands, they weren't fully numb or anything like that, but they were losing some feeling and stuff. I just didn't know what else to do but to push on, and I wasn't going to quit. I was going to keep going. And so, but the thing about leaving this particular aid station is you do this massive climb, and then you hit an aid station, the first aid station of the day, actually. It's called All Unite. You hit that a second time, and no one can drive to that aid station. You can't have, people, crew members there. It's just literally the middle of nowhere, on a really rough back road. And so it's like you leave this aid station, and it's a little bit like you got to finish, right? Because bowing out at that aid station would be like a I don't know, in a vehicle, probably a 4-hour ride to the start.
Like they'd put you in like a little rhino or something, and you
or your crew has to come get you. Yeah.
So that's 36 miles in, right? Or
would be the next aid station.
Yeah.
Yeah, 37 and a half is what it was on the watch. But so yeah, I leave this next aid station and I start hiking, and I'm like, hey, I feel pretty dang good. And I was actually hiking with these 100K guys that were now caught up to me, that are, guys that were probably in the top 20 or something like that of the 100K. And I'm cruising up the mountain like hand in hand with them, feeling great, clicking off 20-minute miles while we're climbing like 1,000 feet. Let's see, well, in 8 miles, let's see, I think it was 7.5 miles.
From Miners?
From Miners up to All Unite.
To All Unite. Well, you peak at 11,600.
Well, let me just do it off a watch. I know that I was at 29 when I left, and I know when I got there I was at 37.5. So
you're running a mile
it was
and
8
a half.
miles.
A mile and a half more than what the map said.
Mm-hmm. So in 8 miles, climb the 3,500 feet. So it's a very steep climb, but I was clicking it off, feeling really good. And I was trying not to look at my watch and see how many feet I'd climbed, right? But eventually I got to the point where I'm like, okay, I've got to be 70+% of the way up this climb. And I look at my watch, and I kind of was. I thought I was over half, and I'm like, sweet. But then I got thinking, I'm like, why did everyone say this was this climb? Because when I glanced at the thing when I was there, and it had said 11,000 feet. I was sitting at this, and I'm like, that's only 3,000 feet. Why was everyone else saying this? So I took out the map again. I looked, and I realized, yep, I had not actually gone all the way to the high point. And so at that point, then I was only halfway, and I felt like I was like 75% of the way, and that was a pretty demoralizing moment. Plus, at about that time, and the reason I think I checked is because I was starting to really feel it, but I hit a massive calorie wall. I had really been under fueling all day long. I had super fuels between aid stations. I had like one honey stinger instead of like 2 or 3 like I had planned the entire day, and that just compounded and compounded. And then doing this massive exertion of a climb, I hit this calorie wall where you can see it on my breakdown of my miles, where I'm doing 20 and 21 minute miles climbing, and then all of a sudden they jump to like 30-minute miles. Like, it was just so apparent. And at that point in time, also, my face twitching started to get worse, like my own perception of it. My hands were worse and starting to lose a lot more dexterity and feeling. And but I still had miles to go. I still had 4 miles to go. And so I'm again crossing these streams, and I'm thinking, man, can I drink this water? Can I drink this water instead of what's in my pack? Because I just did not want to drink any more of that solution. My body was just like saying no, like just this hard stuff. I drank that fresh flask that I had really quick. The super fuel I was trying to get down, but the same thing. Like, it was like between the calories and the salt in it, I was just not wanting to touch it. And then my water bladder was just still so salty to me that I did not want to touch it. So then I'm again just feeling like I'm struggling. Got up to where it actually the elevation, you quit climbing and you kind of go the last mile or so around the mountain over to it, and drink some more of my water. I'm like, I have to drink. Like, I just have to drink more than I've drank. So drank more. Got into that aid station in really rough conditions. I was feeling really, really bad. Got a chair. Someone pulled out a chair. I sat in the chair, and I was just thinking, I'm not in a good spot right now. I had drinking about 2.5 liters of water is what my notes say here. I drank part or most of a super fuel. I ate half of a honey stinger waffle. I got half of it down. It took me like 10 minutes to eat half of a honey stinger waffle, and then I just tossed the rest in a bush. I just couldn't finish it. My mouth was getting really dry. So when I was eating the honey stinger, it was like I had to take a bite and like let it soften in my mouth, because it was like powder. It was just like turning to instant powder in my mouth. And then as I sat there, this is when it started to get worse too. I started to notice I couldn't say the words normally. I couldn't say words normally. So those family members that I talked to you about that were kind of running the race as well, they had caught me on that climb. And so we were at that aid station together, and I'm saying, can you see my face twitching and stuff? And he happens to be a doctor, and he's like, yeah, it could be something from a potassium imbalance or something like that. And I was kind of thinking the same thing, like, it's got to be related to my hydration and some kind of imbalance. But as I was trying to talk to him, I could tell I couldn't say the words I wanted to say, meaning not that I couldn't think of the words that I wanted to say, but articulation. It was like I had a lisp, and my face is just kind of vibrating. My hands are numb, and I was like, oh man, this is bad. At this point in time, it would have been, I think, 7 o'clock at night. So, and I was backtracking the very first section on the day. So again, in the morning, I had run that section, which is actually more downhill than uphill from this aid station. I had run that section in 2 hours. So it's like, man, if you were in a great position, I could have finished in the daylight and been doing good, but I was not in a good position. And this other 100K guy had come and sat down next to me, who was clearly a very seasoned guy. I knew what he was doing, and he's like, oh, I'm in a bad place. And he's like muttering and talking, and he starts shivering and shaking. And I'm like, holy smokes, that's going to be me if I don't like get moving. And he's like, I got to get moving. So he takes off out of the aid station, because he was just, he was losing it. He, mentally and physically, he looked and sounded like he was in a terrible spot. I wasn't as talkative as that guy, but I felt like I was in the same spot. I wasn't shaking, but I was just like, this is a bad situation.
Did you get like that metal mouth?
Yes. So I was starting to get a super metallic mouth, which is typically symbolizes that you're like in ketosis, where your body's just trying to burn as much fat as possible to get the calories it needs.
It can also come from extreme stress or from indigestion, which you are probably having all three of those things at once. So.
Yeah, for real. So I still, like, I'm trying to eat. What did I take out of that aid station? Well, I got there and I realized too that when I'd left that lower aid station the last time I was with my crew, I hadn't grabbed enough food. All I cared about was like the hydration at that moment in time. So I'd grabbed salts and stuff and threw those in my pack, but I had like no food in my pack to take with me. But sitting there, I felt like I couldn't eat either. So I was kind of hoping to try to walk and eat and take a few bites and just do what I could. So I ended up, eventually getting out of there. I remember walking over to the lady at the aid station, because you're supposed to check out of the aid station, say, hey, here's my number, I'm out, right? And I remember walking over there, and I remember being so grateful for these volunteers. And they tell you, like, these people are volunteers, be very kind to them, be nice, be thankful. And I remember walking over and just thinking, like, I was so grateful that they had that aid station. And all I could say, though, was, like, I'm leaving. And I remember, because I even said that, and my articulation of the words was so bad that I was, like, almost embarrassed to try to say anything else. Like, they were going to see that I was in a bad place and try to stop me from going, or I don't know. But I remember clearly thinking that. And I grabbed they had a half a sandwich of peanut butter jelly sitting there, and I grabbed that in one of my hands, and I started walking out of there. And I took one bite of it, like a few steps down the trail, and my mouth was so dry, I couldn't chew it or like eat it. So I took a sip of water, kind of used my other hand to get a sip of water, barely got that bite down, kept walking, and like I went to take the next bite of the sandwich to just try to force it down at this point. And my hands were so numb that it just flew out of my hands onto the dirt. And I just thought, that wasn't good. It's like 200 yards to go back and get like more food there. And I'm like, that's 200 yards too far. Like, I can't even imagine taking a step backwards at this point. And so I was like, but I just remember thinking, man, that was not good. Like, that was like one of my only calorie sources left. At this point, the only thing I have in my backpack is one package of Honey Stinger Performance Chews. And so I get moving, and I'm just walking. I'm just doing.
What time in the evening did you say that was?
I left that aid station somewhere around 7 o'clock.
Okay.
Yeah. So yeah, and at this point, it's just finish mode. It's just like everything's gone off the rails, from cramping to not being able to eat to not being able to drink, and I'm in a bad position. My legs are killing me. Anytime I try to run, like, I get a few steps and my legs are so painful, I just have to stop that lower leg shin muscle. And so, yeah,
I had about 6 miles left.
8. Still had 8 miles to finish. Okay. And they weren't like the worst miles of the race, but by any means, but there was still a lot of climbing to be done and a lot of descending. I don't know. I don't know exactly what the gain and descent of that section was, but there's like some 500-foot climbs in there, and I think there was maybe a 700 or 800-foot climb in there. But it's kind of like you're just going up and then down a little bit, up and down a little bit, the entire way
traversing
back.
Around the mountain to get.
You're going through a basin, but you're kind of climbing up and over a ridge, down like it's like one massive basin, but there's all these finger ridges in it. Yeah. So you're just kind of doing that, and what it got to at this point was that every time I would go uphill, I'd feel sick to my stomach, and I'd have to really slow down. On flat ground, I could move. I could walk at like a 20-minute mile pace. Like, I could just push and walk fast. But then downhill, I could do okay. But then as soon as I got steep at all, my legs were in such pain going down the hill that I couldn't really take the steps, and so I had to really slow down and just start crawling. In fact, I remember, to go backwards, when I was going down Delano at like mile 13, 14, I was so discouraged because I was going so slow. Even when I was on my feet, I was going so slow that my watch quit registering a pace. So I would look at my watch and it would say no pace, and I'm thinking, this is not good. This is not good. Everyone else that's like doing my distance is running down the mountains, you know what I mean? Like, that's where they're making up tons of time. because I could hike uphill at about their pace for most of the race, but downhill, they were just gone. Like they were gone. And anyways, so yeah, just kind of grunt through this section. It gets really tough. I get to probably the biggest climb in this section, and I had to eat those honey stingers in a group of 2. So I ate half of the package to get a little bit of energy, and then another like 15 minutes down the trail, I ate the other half, and at that point I was still 4 miles or so from the finish, maybe 5, and was out of food.
Like, how are you feeling, like, breathing wise? Because you're going from 11,000 feet, 11.5 at that aid station, down to 10.5 to finish, but you'd been pretty high altitude all day long. Were you feeling short of breath, or? So
breathing wise, I never really did feel short of breath at all, which was, I think I had done a good job adapting. I think my VO2 max was also quite high. Like so yeah, my breathing was never a problem, and I think it's mainly because my body couldn't push fast enough for my breathing to become a big limiter. But I had focused at different times in the day on breathing through my nose, trying to not like go faster than my breathing allowed. So there was definitely times when I was like trying to force breathe through my nose and use that as a limiter on my pace.
Yeah.
So like if I was going too fast and I couldn't keep my breathing up through my nose, then maybe I needed to slow my pace down, was kind of the thought there. But I would say at this point in the race, it wasn't breathing, but I very well could have been struggling from other forms of altitude sickness. I think I had maybe a light headache, but mainly just the nausea. You know what I mean? That's probably all from my hydration and fueling, but there's possibility that was coming into play at this point.
Well, one thing we know is that if you have any weakness in what you're doing, whether it's like you have maybe any kind of a cold coming on, or any bit of dehydration, or any underfueling, like that's where that little weakness is what allows the elevation sickness to really like get you,
And that does come up, I guess, later on here too. But at this point, I wasn't thinking that I was struggling from altitude, but it very well, looking back, it could have been starting to set in because of all these weaknesses that I had going on and abnormalities.
Mm-hmm.
But eventually had to get out my headlamp, and felt like you could dang near see the end of the race and whatnot. But just had to grunt out these last miles. My facial twitching was kind of, it was interesting because it would kind of go up and down a little bit. And, completely out of calories, had nothing else to drink or eat. I had water, but it was kind of the same situation where I probably could have drinking more plain water. Didn't really have that. I did put water into my water bladder at that last aid station, but I don't think I put any additional mixes in. But I think it was still so potent, like what was remaining in it,
residual,
that it was mix. still too much salt. You know what I mean? It was still like I probably had like a half a liter still in there. But at that point, that was such a salty mixture from just continuing to mix more and more in all day and not completely draining it, hardly at any aid stations, that even mixing pure water in that probably was still too salty. But
so what time did it get dark?
Almost closer to 10 than 9:30, I would say, because you're so high on the mountain that you can still get a lot of light up there. I was expecting it to get dark closer to 9, but
Do you know how many miles you had left when it got dark?
When it got dark, I probably had 4 miles left.
Okay.
I had just got to the point where you bridge and you're looking at that. You're at the high point where you can look back at the All Unite aid station or look down into that puffer trailhead. It was right there, below Mount Holly. So, yeah. So I was a little bit demoralized because, like, my primary goal is to finish the race. My secondary goal is to finish in the daylight. And then, like, a third goal would just be to finish at a certain pace that I knew pretty soon on was just not even possible. So it did suck when it got dark, because I was like, man, that was like my second hope, is that I could finish in the light. Anyways, so pushed on through that, and I don't even know what to say about the last miles. They were just pure like agony. No matter what I was doing, it was painful, exertion, felt like throwing up, felt like I couldn't eat, couldn't do anything. My body was shaking. My hands were getting more and more numb. Actually, like, dropped my trekking pole and, like, ran into it at one point. That hurt pretty bad. But it was just like fumbling around. I don't know how else to describe that last little bit. It was like,
what were you thinking about most of the time in those last couple miles? Were you just thinking about all the pain and stuff, or was your mind wandering? Or
this will sound funny, but like mile 6, I started to feel really bad for my crew members and people that might be there at the finish line, because I'm like, man, now they got to stay awake until I get there. They got to, like, that was actually what drove me, I would say, the last 6-7 miles harder than almost anything else, was thinking about them and thinking, I don't want them to have to stay up to midnight. They've already been up, all day long, helping out, covering the mountains, and now they're having, like, I don't want them to have to sit there till midnight, and so I just thought, man, the sooner I can finish, the sooner that they can get out of here and go to sleep. And so I was thinking a lot, like, it was kind of like I'd get mad at myself when it was like, man, I can't go faster. I want to go faster, and it's just costing time and time and time. Because at that point, I mean, all my expectations of my own personal time were gone. Like, right, it's just like, it's just finish. And so really that was like the biggest driver to move as painfully and quickly as I could through that section of 6-7 miles. Reminded me a lot of the Grand Canyon, where I was like, oh man, I've got Eric's tent, and it was honestly the same thing where, I pushed so hard in the Grand Canyon to finish those last like 8 miles or whatever to get into camp and give Eric a spot to sleep, because we had a 2-person tent. He was in my tent with me, and I get there and he could have cared less. He was dead asleep on the ground. You know what I mean? And it was basically the same. It wasn't the same thing, but it was similar. Like, they weren't trying to go to bed, when I got there. It was like they weren't worried about being tired. They were just worried about me, right?
Yeah. Well, whatever gets you to the finish.
Yeah. It was good. It was a driver. But yeah, I mean, so I come down this big section, do all this section, and then the last hill, man. I don't know why they put the start where it is, but there's like a last, like, probably like a 200-foot climb to climb up the ski run back to the start. And it's just like, really? I have nothing left to give, and you're going to put this hill right here? I remember being so mad about that. But, got up the hill. One of my family members, had been kind of sitting on the side waiting for me, and he's like, oh, he's super stoked. He kind of jumped out of the trees and scared me, and walked through the finish line and met Bree and my mom there, and was just like, I just kept picturing the whole time that I'd get to that finish line and just want to just collapse, like just lay on the ground and not move and not do anything. And but yeah, they kind of pulled up a chair and just sat in the chair and just, I don't know. It's like you've been walking for 17 hours at this point. 17 hours and 1 minute. I finished at 11 p.m., 11:01. And you just sit down and you're just like, I don't even know where to begin with what to do next. They're trying to get you water or get you this and that, and you're just like, I just don't want anything. I just want to, like, disappear and, like, feel nothing, and but yeah, I had these distant relatives that I rarely get to see, that they live near the race, and they were there cheering on the other group. The group that I had kind of been going with, that all finished at about 10 o'clock, that I'd kind of been in the middle section of the race with. They'd all finished about an hour ahead of me. I lost at least a full hour in that last section. So they're all, there, and I want to talk to them. I haven't seen them forever. One of them even used to ship product for us, when he was here at college, and I was trying to talk, and my speech was so bad at that point that like I couldn't even, like, converse. Meaning, like, I didn't feel like they could understand what I was saying. Not that I didn't know what I wanted to say, but that I couldn't articulate the words to be understood. And it's really frustrating, because you're trying so hard and you're, like, embarrassed about it. You're, like, almost wanting to cover your mouth, and they're kind of laughing and giggling, like, because it's funny to them, but they're also, like, super concerned, like, dude, this guy is freaking messed up. But so it was just kind of a weird position to be in where you're just I don't know. You want to talk to them, they want to be there for you, but there's like you can't talk, you can't really. In fact, it was funny. I think we had Joe take like a group photo at the end, and I was trying my freaking hardest to smile. And looking at the photo, I look like a freak. I'm not smiling. I don't know what I'm doing. I look like I'm in a daze and just have a weird expression on my face that doesn't make any sense. But yeah, that was. I thought I don't know, if I was someone, I would be very concerned, and I felt like they trusted me enough when I kind of said like, no, don't be concerned. Like, I feel okay. I think this is just a hydration, situation that will pass, and thankfully it did improve over the next hour or so of me, not exerting myself, just sitting and doing nothing, eating a little bit of food and then drinking a little bit. I finally was able to eat there. They had nasty, cheap hot dogs at the finish line and loaded it up with ketchup, and I was able to eat one of those, and I'm sure that probably helped my situation as well. But it was nuts, man. I don't know what else to say. I guess my legs were in pretty bad shape. Like I say, they were just in so much pain. That shin muscle of kind of going downhill, and it kind of makes sense. Grand Canyon. Maybe you remember this. Do you remember how much gain and descent we tracked in the Grand Canyon?
Yeah, I remember the first descent being like 4,000, then the climb up to the north rim being like 6,000, and then coming back down that 6,000, and then another 1,000 to camp. So the elevation gain.
Well, so that means we would have lost somewhere around 10,000 feet in the day.
Yeah.
But only climbed about half of that due to most of our
more than we
half
had climbed about 6,000 that day.
Yeah. So to keep in mind of what this race was, I had descended over 12,000 feet, but also climbed over 12,000 feet. But it really seemed as if the descent is what just wrecked that lower leg muscle. But anyways, the fun didn't totally stop there, so I'll kind of finish, I guess, the last piece of the story, and then we can go on to any other thoughts or questions or whatnot. But so I ended up finishing, getting driven back over to where our camp was. I'm probably going to sleep between 12:30, something like that. I got a shower in. That was pretty rough, but went to sleep, and I woke up at 3 a.m. with a racing heart, feeling nauseous again, and with a headache. And those are 3 really good indicators that you have elevation sickness, because my camp was still at 10,000 feet in elevation. And I got up and I thought, well, I've got to try to drink, I've got to try to eat and see if I can subside this. And so I sat, basically I'd eat a few bites of chips, take a few sips of water, and fall asleep in a chair for like 15 minutes, wake up, repeat, wake up, repeat for about an hour. And by 4 a.m. I thought, if I don't get off the mountain, this is just going to get worse for me, and tomorrow's going to be miserable. I need to pack up all the camp and get off the mountain and all this stuff. And so I don't know if this was wise or not, if I was fully sure, but it just felt a lot like elevation sickness was setting in because of how exerted and drained and dehydrated and everything that I was. And so I actually drove myself off the mountain at 4 a.m., got down to about 6,000 feet in elevation, and then slept in the car for a couple of hours, and then came back up the mountain. And it helped. It, like, my heart rate was able to drop back down, my nausea subsided quite a bit, and my headache went away. So that was good. I would say, though, the nausea didn't really stop until about yesterday. Like, I feel like my gut is still trying to figure out life.
So 5 days.
5 days post, my gut was so wrecked and so messed up that I've been nauseous and having weird gut issues. Just like, I'm not hungry, and then I eat, and I feel like I need to eat a ton, and then like 2 hours later, I feel nauseous again, but I feel hungry, and I really wrecked my gut with that. So I think taking in too much salt just triggered it pretty significantly, and it's been a process of resetting my gut. And then the last thing is my lower leg on my left side is extremely messed up. In fact, I spent last night and this morning, trying to do the YouTube diagnosis of whether I've got a hairline fracture in it or whether I've got a shin splint type of situation going on. But I would say I'm pretty freaked out about that because we have a 110-mile Uinta Highline trail that we start on Monday. Today's Thursday. So that's been really painful. It's been throbbing, and I can't like articulate it and move it that well, but I've just been trying to do as much active rehab on that. Basically at this point I just have to assume that it is muscular, like shin splint, and just a muscle that's super inflamed down there. I've got a lot of swelling in that area. It's above the ankle, but it's like the weirdest spot. It's like literally this shin area, like the thinnest part above the ankle before it gets into like your meaty calf, is where I've got this pain. But at this point I'm just treating it as if it's a muscle or a shin splint, and hoping for the best, because a hairline fracture would be, I would probably keep me off of the Highline Trail. So I don't think I'm going to get an X-ray. I think I'm just going to go for it. But yeah, that's the extent of I think the race. So I don't know, if I skipped anything or if there's any other big takeaways. I would say this. I finished that night, and I literally said to my family members, I did it, and I never have to do that again. I don't think I ever want to do that again. It was rough. It was excruciating. I know that I'm bad at it. I say bad, but there was tons of people that dropped out of the race that couldn't finish. There's 30 plus people. There's 50 people essentially behind me or so. So I wasn't quite dead middle in the pack. I was a little bit behind that, but I think the thing is, I think in my life, I'm very blessed, and I like to do things and be good at things. And when I'm not good at things, it can be very frustrating to me. But I literally woke up, and Bree said, when I said that to her that night, she's like, yeah, right. You're going to forget by tomorrow. You're going to be back here next year or something. And I said, no, I don't think so. I don't think that's a possibility. And by the end of the next day, I had just sat and analyzed everything that I thought I'd done wrong, and how I could have done hydration better, how I could have slowed down and eaten better earlier in the race, how I could have started with those leg sleeves, those compression sleeves just helped me so much. How I could have come into it not still injured from the Grand Canyon, all of these things, and I just thought, and I just felt like I didn't leave my best performance out there. And so, unfortunately, I am interested in doing it again, just to feel like I ran the race that I trained for.
A 70, another 70K.
Yeah. Probably.
Now you have a benchmark.
Probably the same exact race.
Yeah.
Which that is an extremely difficult 70K. I would have done so much better had I started with an easier, less elevation gain and descend 50K marathon. I'd never run any race to this point. Never a marathon, never a half marathon, never anything. And but I would have done so much better had I been able to do a good shakeout, or even completed the training that I wanted to train, and done a 20-mile day running and testing out fueling and hydration. But the way that it all shook out for me, how busy the summer got, injuries from the Grand Canyon, and my inability to train and stuff like that. So I guess what it left me feeling, especially as I got into day 2, and my legs felt totally fine. My legs were totally fine. Most everything except for that shin bone is not even sore. And so what it made me feel like is I just didn't run the race that I trained for. And so I think that's what potentially will drive me to try something like this again. To just feel like they say, don't blow out your legs. Well, my legs weren't tired. I just had no energy, Yeah, or don't run down the hills too much and blow out your quads. Well, I was far from that. I feel like I think next year if I went into it, my goal would be to actually run it 2 hours faster. And I feel like that would have felt more like what I'd been training for the whole time instead of just feeling like
survival.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting. You hear people that do marathons say if you're sore for longer than 3 days, then you push too hard. If you're not sore for 3 days, then you didn't push hard enough. It's kind of like what I've heard other people who do ultras and who do marathons say. So I think that's interesting that like it's pretty obvious that the injury or the thing that was going on in your calf was the determining factor for your speed, not necessarily your cardiovascular endurance or your having enough miles on your legs to be ready to do it.
Yeah.
So you also said you tracked more miles than what the race was planned. The race was planned 43 miles is what 70K is.
I tracked 45.6. Yeah.
2.5 extra miles there.
Yeah, they had a reroute actually in the race that added at least a mile or more of that. But yeah, just cumulatively through the whole thing, I added an extra 2.5 or more miles. So that's frustrating when you're like, maybe I would have completed it on time, type of thing if I had the right miles, right? Because 3 miles is, an hour's worth of time at the pace I was ending at. So could have finished maybe an hour earlier if there wasn't those extra miles in there. But yeah, I don't know. I think there was a ton of lessons. I think going and pushing yourself to do something this hard just is going to expose flaws, and you're gonna learn, and you're gonna come back, I guess, better, before or that second time you do it. There's so many, I guess, lessons from it and so many takeaways, but I mean, now it's easy for me to look back and say I should have ran more downhills. I should have, if I could have, right? Which again, after Grand Canyon, I just wasn't able to do that.
So the first should have is we only plan one 40-mile day every 6 months rather than having 40-mile day, then going straight into the Appalachian Trail where we did 100 miles in 3 full days and 2 part days. And then you were like trying to recover from those 2 weeks this whole time, which really screwed up your training, right?
Yeah.
So,
well, I think yeah, like I could have done more training with a full pack on, which is probably what messed me up the most on the Grand Canyon, was that I wasn't training with a 20-pound pack or 15-pound pack. I was training with a 5 to 10-pound pack. So that probably was part of it. I think a big part of it too, which, looking back now, it's like everyone says, don't do anything you've never done before. Well, the problem was I always cramp. I always cramp on runs. I cramped on the Grand Canyon, and I actually thought that the cramping led into more of my issues injuries from the Grand Canyon. And so when I got this sweat test back, my thought was, here's the silver bullet type of thing. Try that nutrition out. The problem was I didn't have experience with it. So that was like a massive thing that I switched without any...
Right before the race,
without any, it didn't feel like it was a massive switch, and it felt like I could adapt that during the race. But the farther you get into a race, the less you're really thinking that clear, and the less you can really take yourself out of the situation and understand it. So looking back now, it's like, yeah, I think hydration and over salting messed up my gut. It messed up my ability to consume calories, messed up my ability to get enough just water into my system. And, as far as everything else, I think that was just injury-related stuff and my own issues, with training or injury. So at least like the fueling and hydration part, I think, looking back now, I think I just totally messed it up by not getting those results early enough to have done really any thorough testing with it. Which I think is a big thing. So, I mean, I think takeaways for this would be that if you're someone who's going out on trail, doing big miles or upping your mileage and stuff like that, like don't like treat it almost like a trail race where it's like don't do anything super drastic, and try to stick to your training, try to stick to what you know. If you do alter things, alter safe things, and alter them a minimal amount, and then go back to baseline, right? Because if I had just done that one section with 3 salts in my pack and then immediately gone back to 1 to 2 hypers per 2-liter bladder,
you would have bounced back without going over.
I would have fixed the problem that I had and been in a good spot for the rest of the race. But I didn't go back to neutral. I stayed on an overcorrected path,
right?
Which I think is a good takeaway as well. But
yeah, I think that's a really interesting thing. The fact that you can bounce back as good as you did by doing that one little move to catch up, but then not continuing to overdo it, that would have been obviously in hindsight the better thing. But that's an interesting little thing to learn, is that you can catch up. And you kind of knew that from the Grand Canyon, because when we got to the point on the Grand Canyon where Brigham's knee got so bad that he was going to have to walk real slow the rest of the way in, that was when you got that hyper from Brigham, and instantly felt better.
Mm-hmm. So I was able to start retaining water again. The water was just passing through me, and so when I got that hyper, that big dose of salt, I was able to retain some water and started to feel better almost instantly. But so it's, to me, it was just, if I had been able to dial that in, I would have probably been able to hit the right amount and just go back to neutral. If you have to course correct on trail, go back to neutral, I think is the big lesson. And if you get back off again, okay, try another thing, but then go back to neutral. I just think that would have helped so much, And I think if I was to go run this race again, I would focus so heavily on hitting my calorie and hydration markers that I would almost try to forget my pace, or not care about my pace if that was possible, the first 16 miles, and just 100% focus on hitting my calories in and my hydration in.
Basically, so that you feel like you're fresh as far as hydration and calories goes by the time you get to that halfway mark or something. And then
because if you dig a hole early on like I did, that early on, your race, and that's what makes me so frustrated about all this, is I knew this, this, right? But I still fell victim to it somehow. And so I think that's the big takeaway. I think I needed to do a first race to get those, that first section. I think I was totally ready for that first section, but I think just between excitement, talking to people, trying to figure things out, I got lost in the moment because it was my first race, because of that excitement, and I already got behind on the hydration more than I should have. And so that's probably a good, just experience aspect of it too. I think experience is a massive factor in these trail races, and so and for backpacking, for any of this, the more time you can spend out, the more time you can learn from other people, the more time you can get your own personal experiences with things, the more you're going to be able to bounce back from things, the more you're going to be able to handle these things and stay on trail and feel good instead of continuing down a bad path. But I felt very happy that I was able to bounce back from the cramping. Usually, that's probably the first time I've ever really bounced back from cramping. Even that situation in the Grand Canyon, I was cramping in my upper quad. By the time I took that hyper nutrition, we were going downhill and almost, and so that was less fatiguing on my quad. A lot of that was my lower leg at that point, and just kind of shuffling along when I was kind of jogging back into camp. And so I don't think that I think in my mind, I still would have cramped if I had continued climbing, if that makes sense. But we were so close to the top when I started to cramp that was the big difference there for me. So it was a new experience for me to be able to cramp that early on and then fix it and then run another 30 miles without major cramps. So that was pretty cool to see that I could course correct there. I'd never experienced that. Usually I cramp until the very, once I start cramping, I don't stop until the very end historically. So that was pretty cool. But.
So I think to kind of bring this back for everyone listening, how did this race and this experience of doing 45.5 miles, how did that make you more capable and confident in the backcountry, just overall. Or confident and comfortable is what we say for the podcast, right?
Well, I've cramped and I've dehydrated a lot on races or on backpacking trips, especially at elevation. It's so easy to dry out up there. So much wind, so much dry wind. You're sweating. You don't even really know it. You're just in full sun exposure. All those things that come back to headaches. All these types of things. So, to me, knowing that I can bounce back from cramping is a really big takeaway. Knowing that knowing the things that led to this race, and then actively during this race of how much hydration I need, the sweat tests, the sodium tests, all these things basically give me a ton of hope that instead of just feeling like I'm just bad when I get to high elevation, that I can adapt and put my body in a position to do good at those elevations. So we're about to go do a bunch of high elevation crap and go hike the highest peak in Utah and go through the biggest, tallest passes in all of Utah at 13,500 feet type terrain
at a fast pace. And so now it makes me feel very capable and confident that I can get the hydration right, especially going a little bit slower. I can make adaptations. I can salt up when I need to. I can pull it down when I need to. I can maybe it's things like not mixing so much of your stuff right when you want to. Carry a clean water bottle until you feel like for sure which way you want to do. If you want pure water, if you want to salt it up, if you those types of things. I think I've got a lot of confidence in that. It also just makes me feel like a 20-mile day is going to feel like nothing. I was done with 20 miles by noon, right, on this race day. So it makes me feel confident in clicking off miles, even at elevation. So I think there is a lot of takeaways into that side of things. Even just like the post-race, being able to wake up and be like, look at my heart rate and see what it had done while I was sleeping, see what it's at now, see how I'm feeling, and be like, holy crap, I've got elevation sickness, and know an action plan for me of what I could do, which should have been, like if I was on the High Line and I was feeling that way, would be drink water, drink salty water, get hydrated up, step 1. Step 2, force fuel into yourself. Even if it means I'm going to puke it up, like it's worth attempting to get those things in your body and getting your body back hydrated so that your heart rate can come back lower and get your heart rate back down and get the stress of your body being underfueled or underhydrated back down. And so I think all of those things really play into me being more confident to go back into these elevation situations, covering big miles, and maybe feel like, hey, maybe I can course correct, knowing that I can spot things earlier on, and knowing that that I just now have more knowledge of. See, I've never been oversalted in my life. This is the first time ever. Especially based off of my test results, I have always been undersalted on every hike, every run I've ever done until this one. And now I've swung it all the way to the opposite side, and now I know what that's like. So hopefully that all turns into experience that can then just translate into better experiences on trail. Yeah. I think what you did is really admirable in a lot of ways. You knew that you could do 30-mile days on trail because we've done a couple this year. So a 50K wasn't going to take you to your limit, So I can see why you chose a 70K, because you didn't know if you could finish that and you didn't know what you would learn. But also, I think there's a lot that you can learn by doing a race or joining a competition rather than pushing yourself beyond your limits by yourself. Because in a race situation, it's a lot more of a controlled environment. It's a lot safer for you to do. There's resources for you to get out if you did push too hard. And so being able to take yourself all the way to your limits in a safe place where there's a lot of knowledgeable people around you is awesome. Because now, like, say there's a wildfire wherever we're hiking, and all of a sudden a 20-mile day has to turn into a 40-mile day, like, what it will take, right? So I think that that's a really cool thing. And I think that you did more right than you're saying, because you did finish. You came in with good empirical data that most people don't. start something like this with, and you had a pretty good showing, I think, for the injuries and things that you were dealing with. So I think it's an awesome thing to hear about. I hope that it inspires everyone to kind of think about their limits and think about safe ways to learn, your personal limits, and come at it from a perspective of, the more that I know what I can do, the safer I'll be and the better I'll be able to plan my trips and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I'm very hard on myself. I think as a person, I'm just pretty good at wanting to push harder. And I actually am very proud for finishing this race, all things considered. Going all the way back to that low point at, that 13, 14 miles in, and feeling that it was a real question, whether I was going to have to drop. And I mean, knowing me, like, I wasn't going to drop until I was like crawling, you know what I mean? And it was just literally impossible for me to finish by cutoffs type of thing. But yeah, like, I am actually quite proud of being able to complete it. I think just what my brain loves to do is, like, I embrace that for what it's worth. And then the next thing is like, but I just have this thing that's just like, but what could I have done? Or what could I have changed? What could I have improved? And fortunately, I think that's what helps drive Outdoor Vitals forward is just that constant belief of being able to own things and improve things. I can't blame the mountain for setting me up wrong, and I can't blame other runners, and I can't blame anything except myself. And I think taking that approach to life is a really, it's the only way that you can improve. If you blame other people in the situations, for us, if you blame a supplier, you blame a shipping provider, whatever, you can't improve until you can own 100% your side of the equation. And when you can do that, you can now make improvements to put yourself in a better position in the future. And I think looking at this, I am happy. I am proud of being able to accomplish this. I do think that I will never be a great ultra runner. I think I run because I'm not good at it, which is a very strange thing, I think, to say for some people. But some of you might get that. Some of you might understand what I'm talking about when I say I run because I'm bad at it. Yeah, I think there's a good chance you'll see me doing something like this again, and hopefully we'll have learned and course corrected, and especially hopefully with just regular backpacking, it will pay massive dividends for me on the trail. So,
well, we like it when you put yourself on the line for testing for the rest of us, like when you sleep in wet sleeping bags or run 70K races. So I think it's awesome.
The gear actually did amazing, I will say. I had like the fast pack was amazing. The shorts dried so freaking fast, I can't believe, especially with how sweaty of a person I am. And there was good feedback for. I had a big download with Brigham, our designer, yesterday, and gave him a lot of good info. But it's all purpose driven, I guess. So
yeah, I was impressed with the crew at Aravipa. They put on a pretty awesome event. Logistically, that's a crazy undertaking.
Yeah.
To try and do that.
Yeah, if any of you guys want to maybe come run next year and see me out there beating myself up, look into the Tushars Mountain Race. It was a great event. The trail was well marked the entire way through, which is a massive undertaking, and it was a great event. So
yeah,
I think we probably ought to wrap this up. I'm sure this will come back up in other conversations. Maybe if there's things we forgot, we'll let it out. So make sure you are subscribed to the podcast. There's probably more to break down and take away from this. I know there's more. So yeah, just make sure you're subscribed. If you would also be so kind to leave a review. Tell us what you think of the podcast. Tell us what you like, what you dislike. It's all very helpful for us to continue to adapt this podcast and make it better. But yeah, we do appreciate anyone who has left a review. It does mean a lot. If you do want to watch any of this, we do have a YouTube channel called the Live Ultralight Podcast channel on YouTube that you can watch this or listen to it that way. But yeah, thanks for tuning in, guys. Thanks for hearing about what a what a journey that particular trip was and event was. Really appreciate it. Hope you guys are out there pushing your own limits and enjoying nature and getting into those wilderness areas and just having a good time. But with that, we'll talk to you on the next podcast.